皆様こんにちは。本日はこの笹川平和財団とそれから米日カウンシルの共催でございますアジア系アメリカ人の州議会の議員の方たちのパネルディスカッション、パネル講演会によくいらしてくださいました。今ご紹介いただきました本日モデレーターを務めますNobukoフォーラムジャパンの笹江信子と申します。ご案内の通り、このパネルでございますけれども、アジア系のアメリカ人、その州議会での議員の方たちの皆さんの歩んできた道のり、ライフストーリーとか、ライフジャーニーというふうに言いますけれども、それをお聞きするプログラムでございます。今、2人の方からそれぞれご紹介があったように、アジア系アメリカ人というのは、アメリカの中でも最も急速に人口が増大しているグループ、マイノリティグループでございますので、今、その代表としての皆様が、一体どういう気持ちでアメリカの社会とか政治の中で役割を果たそうとしていらっしゃるかということをお聞きしたいと思いますし、また皆さんご自身の出身の国、あるいはご自身のお父様、お母様、あるいはそのおじい様、おばあ様が来た国ということに特別な思いを抱いていらっしゃると思いますので、そういう国との間でどういうその橋を渡すという役割を果たされようとしていらっしゃるのかということを聞いていきたいと思います。ここはライフストーリーを聞く場所でございますので、なるべく皆さんの体験とか経験に基づいた話が聞けたらというふうに思っております。で、皆さんからの質問もたくさん受け付けたいと思いますので、お話を聞きながらどうぞ紙の中にお書きになって提出していただけたらと思います。最初にそれぞれ今日は6人いらっしゃいますので、簡単に自己紹介をしていただいて、どうして政治の道を志したのかとか、それからまたその今、この地方議会というその仕事を通じて何をミッションとして達成なさりたいのかということを含めてお話をまずお聞きしたいというふうに思っております。So first, I would like to ask you to give us your introductory statement. Time is very short, so unfortunately, maybe 3, 4, 5 minutes each. So starting from Chris-san, please.
Thank you. I'll use my microphone. Thank you to the Nippon Foundation, Sasakawa Peace Foundation, and the U.S. Japan Council for hosting us. So I'm Chris Cheung. I'm from the state of Indiana. And to give you some background of my origin, my parents were both born in Korea in the 1950s, shortly after the Korean War. On my mom's side, my maternal grandmother was an obstetrician and my maternal grandfather was a pharmacist in Korea. While on my father's side, my grandmother was a homemaker and my grandfather was a banker for Bank of Korea, which later became Korea Exchange Bank. And he actually lived in Tokyo for 4 years for his job. So he knew some Japanese and passed that down to my father as well. I have 2 older sisters. Both of my parents, sisters, and brothers-in-law are medical doctors. All of them are, except me. So my parents wanted me to also become a doctor as well, but I don't like looking at blood, so I decided against it. And when I decided to run, I was going through a long thought process. As immigrants, my parents were very skeptical of when I told them I was considering running for office. They thought it would be impossible for a young Asian American to win a district of 65,000 people, which is over 90% Caucasian. And it was very difficult, so my mother was right in that respect. My family and I are also very concerned, well, we were concerned about the loss of privacy in a campaign. In political life, it is very common to lose any semblance of privacy. And as a politician, a lot of people will form an inflexible opinion of you without even ever talking to you before. They'll form conclusions based on hearsay or from the media or from attack ads that your opponent puts out. So my mom did discourage me from running for office. She said it was an incredibly stressful job, not very well paid, and the public can be so unfair and uninformed and stubborn. But I agreed with her, but I did feel an overwhelming need to serve ultimately. I decided to run for office because no one else wanted to run against my predecessor. I disagreed with some of his votes, but I never had a chance to get involved in politics prior to that, and I had never even considered politics as an option for me growing up. In high school, I was interested in becoming an investment banker, working on Wall Street in New York, and then I changed my mind in college, ended up getting my major in engineering, and ended up working for a real estate company in Chicago, near Northwest Indiana, where I grew up. The company really focused on balancing the capitalism but also social responsibility, in that our company invested in really disinvested neighborhoods in Chicago, very poor neighborhoods in Chicago, and we brought big investors like JP Morgan to try and renovate apartments and get a better product out there for people who hadn't had this kind of real estate product before. So then things kind of took a turn in 2016. After the result of that very unexpected election, I started becoming more aware of politics. It was inescapable. It was like the new small talk. Instead of talking about the weather, you talk about politics after 2016. My family and I were not really, we were sporadic voters, not super active in the political scene, so I began volunteering for other causes in my community, trying to understand what people cared about, why they voted the way they did, and then I kind of, through all of those volunteer experiences, ended up learning how people were really concerned about the policies that lawmakers set. They were concerned they weren't being heard and didn't have access to their lawmakers either. So originally I wanted to run someone else's campaign instead of running my own campaign, but when nobody came forward, I decided that it had to be me on my own. My predecessor, to give you some perspective, was a town councilman for 10 years in my district, and then he was a state representative for 3 terms, for 6 years after that, and he won his prior midterm election by 20 percentage points. So nobody wanted to run against him, understandably, because they all thought it was a suicide mission. They should have talked me out of it, but ultimately I'm very glad that I ended up running because it was such a blessing in the role I'm in now. And I'm very excited to be in Japan. My state of Indiana and Japan have a very close business relationship, especially in the manufacturing and auto manufacturing sectors. And maintaining that relationship and growing that relationship is a top priority. With all the turmoil going on in Korea, I hope that one day we can not only see a unified Korean peninsula, but also better relationships across the Asia-Pacific region. Thank you.
I'm State Representative Nima Kulkarni. I am a member of the Kentucky House of Representatives. I want to thank you all for being here this afternoon, and I also would like to extend my thanks to the Sasakawa Peace Foundation and the U.S. Japan Council. I was actually born in India and moved to Louisville when I was about 6 years old. So waking up in Louisville, Kentucky, after having spent my first 6 years of life in India was both scary and exciting. My parents made the decision to move our family from India directly to Louisville, Kentucky, so that my brother Nikhil could get the special education that he needed that he could not get in India. There was a specific school called the DePaul School that was located in Louisville that my parents wanted him to attend. So from a very young age, the importance of education was instilled by our parents in us. When we arrived in Louisville, my parents, who had bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, they both spoke good English, they couldn't find a job anywhere in Louisville. So they borrowed money, they used their savings, and they bought a small corner grocery store in what was the heart of Germantown. It was called Germantown because that's where a lot of the German immigrants used to live, in Louisville. And it was called 8 to 8, kind of like 7-Eleven here. It was open 8 in the morning to 8 in the evening. We didn't really know what to expect. My father was an executive. My mother hosted parties and was kind of a socialite. I mean, there wasn't really a whole lot of experience with a small corner grocery store, and our neighbors. So we didn't know what to expect. There weren't too many immigrants at that time, especially in that area. But we were welcomed by this community of German immigrants and their descendants. And so much so that my brother and I were allowed every day to deliver groceries to our neighbors who were elderly and couldn't come to the grocery store to purchase those groceries themselves. Sometimes they would give us a nickel or a dime as a tip. for an allowance. And even though they couldn't pronounce my parents' full names, they were Indian names, Sureka and Suhas, they nicknamed them Sam and Sue. And they really looked out for our family. And they, we used to have the prior owner of the grocery store had a gun because it was considered a bad part of town, and my father refused to keep it in the store. And because of our neighbors, we never needed to use it and always felt safe. This is how I learned the value of community and the value of hard work from watching my parents go through this experience. My parents, of course, went on to become heavily involved in the Louisville community, founded other businesses, they supported charitable causes throughout the city. My father became the first director of the Office for Globalization in Louisville, and my mother started the Beaded Treasures Project, which is a nonprofit that helps disadvantaged women become self-sufficient. I attended public school my whole life. I went on to earn a bachelor's degree in English, an MBA from the University of Louisville. I also earned a law degree from the Antioch UDC Law School in Washington, D.C. My law school was very progressive, and we had to complete at least 700 hours of community clinical legal services in underserved communities in Washington, D.C. This is how I learned that law does not have to be an abstract concept, that it can have a real and direct impact on people. One of these clinics was an immigration law clinic, and I've been specializing in that field ever since. In 2010, I returned to Louisville and founded the Indus Law Firm, which specializes in employment-based immigration. I've been a solo practitioner since that time. And following in my parents' footsteps, I tried to immerse myself in the Louisville community. I served on several nonprofit boards, and I have a list of them here, but in the interest of time, I will not go through all of them. But the common theme with all of these nonprofits and boards that I served on is that they tried to engage the community on a civic level. I was involved on that level. I felt I wanted to do more, so I went through the Emerge program in 2012, which helps Democratic women become elected, helps them learn how to run a campaign. I knew that I didn't want to run for office in 2012, but the seed was planted at that time. It was more, I wanted to know what it was like to maybe run a campaign like Chris, or just to become involved in electoral politics. But then the 2016 election happened. We also happened to have a very contentious governor, and so in 2018, that was the time I decided that I needed to run for office and really put my hat in the ring. I knew I could bring a unique perspective about growing up in Kentucky as an immigrant, and that my voice would be powerful in promoting policies and legislation that could positively impact all Kentuckians. I also beat an incumbent Democrat who had been in office for over 20 years and had never had a single primary challenge that entire time, and won my race against a Republican opponent as well. I'm the first Indian, the first immigrant, and the first Asian American to be elected to the Kentucky General Assembly. I'm humbled and proud of the faith that the voters placed in me, and I have a list of legislation that I supported, but I'll skip that as well. I'll end by saying that being a Kentucky state legislator has opened up a lot of opportunities for me, like this conference, which has been an amazing experience, and I look forward to using what I've learned to better represent my constituents in the future. Thank you.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Thank you again for coming out today, this afternoon. It's been a beautiful week that we've spent here in Japan, and so I appreciate the hospitality of not only our sponsors, but of the Japanese people in all the locations that we have been fortunate enough to travel to. I am from Nevada, and I proudly represent Assembly District 10, which is in the heart of the city of Las Vegas. So some of you may be familiar with Las Vegas as opposed to just the state of Nevada. And my story is similar to many Vietnamese Americans, but it's slightly different. My father came to the United States in 1975 as a Vietnamese refugee. He fought alongside the South Vietnamese military and U.S. military and ultimately came here. It was his deep-rooted belief in democracy and freedom that he has always passed on to both me and my younger sister. Our story is a little bit unique. When he arrived in Washington State, where my colleague here is from, and he met my mother, who is Caucasian. So I am half Vietnamese and half Caucasian, so it is a very unique immigrant story. Both of my parents did not have formal educations, did not graduate from high school or attend college, and both worked in the service industry. But they did instill in me a strong work ethic and the importance of education. So I attended college at the University of Puget Sound in Tacoma, Washington, where I participated in, I was the vice president of the Asian Pacific American Student Union, because I wanted to make sure that there was representation, and I learned about civic engagement in the university setting. I later moved to Las Vegas in 1999, about 20 years ago, where I attended law school and obtained my Juris Doctorate and have practiced in the area of criminal defense since that time. In the Nevada Assembly, I am the first Asian American Democrat to ever serve in the state legislature, and I'm only the second Asian American to ever serve in any state legislative office. On the municipal level, in the city councils, or on the state level, so in any version of the state of Nevada, which is significant because the Asian population in the state of Nevada is currently at about 10%, and it is also one of the fastest growing populations in the state as well as nationally. My state was also the first. We talked about representation of women in government, and my state was the first in the United States to be a majority female legislature. So in both houses, both the Senate as well as the Assembly, females are in the majority. So that's a unique and interesting perspective that we had this last legislative session. I have the honor to serve on the Judiciary Committee, which handles all legislation with respect to gaming, which I know has become an important topic here in this country of Japan with the introduction of integrated resorts. So we've had lots of discussions about that and about my experiences working on gaming legislation and laws in the state of Nevada as well. Being the first of any representative group is sometimes a lot of pressure. I know that my colleagues probably feel that pressure when you are the only individual in that role. I was lucky and fortunate enough to be a part of a lot of firsts. The first female majority, the Speaker of our House is the first African American to ever serve in that position, and it gave a common experience that we understand that we have a responsibility to our state and our community to promote that feeling that young people can look up to the state legislature and to politicians and know that that is an option for them, that young Asian American women can look at the legislature and realize that is a job that they can also do. Diversity is what makes Nevada, Nevada, and I'm proud to have the opportunity to represent that diversity here today. So thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. I concur with all my colleagues' statement earlier to really send a deep gratitude to all organizations that make this opportunity possible for all of us. So my name is Mi-Lin Tai. I'm representative from Washington State. I am the eldest of 5 siblings. I was born during the height of Vietnam War in 1968. My father was a high-ranking Army officer in the South Vietnam Army, and my mother was vice president of a national bank before 1975, which was known as the Fall of Saigon. After that, my dad went to prison, being known as the re-educational camp. My mom lost her job, And the newly formed government at the time viewed all literates as potential uprising force and labeled them the individuals who could be dangers to community. Both of my parents were the first in their family to attend university. They both earned degrees in economics and political science. When my dad was released from prison, he was not the same person. He was in prison for roughly 5 years. The decision of uprooting the entire family and immigrated to the United States was a decision made for the sake of us kids. So we came to the United States, 7 of us, in the spring of 1983. Politics was certainly the farthest topic in my mind. I graduated high school on time, attained a degree in science from the University of Washington School of Pharmacy. I married a kid and happily survived. I honestly see myself as an accidental politician. I first decided to run for office in the year 2013, serving as school board director. The event which led me to that decision was when I headed a scholarship committee in my area, in my school districts. I came upon 2 students identified themselves as undocumented. After I read their essays, I could not understand why they were not even in the pool to be considered for these particular scholarships. I pulled up their entire portfolios. I went through all the rubrics. And through that, they reminded me of that kid in 1983 who came to the United States with a dream. That dreams sometimes happen and sometimes don't. And that was when I realized that the very system which made all the decisions impacted my life was never set up for people like me. So I decided to make change for the generations after me, not to be subjected to the same system. While serving in an elected capacity, I have learned how little thought was put into policies which negatively impact the people in minority, especially in public education. In fact, I was convinced by my children to run for the State House representative. They again reminded me of the privilege that I have had, knowing so many stories of families who have lost hope as far as the system would serve them. I am the first refugee ever elected to serve in the capacity of state legislators in Washington. My story is not unique. In fact, it's being shared by so many families, so many stories of immigrants and refugees across the United States. I intend to engage with marginalized community, to elevate their voice, their stories. I intend to influence the perception of my fellow legislators when it comes to what discrimination and racism look like, so that they can not be masked by languages that was not beneficial for these community. I intend to share my story, a simple one, the one of the opportunity to live, to breathe, to love, to learn, and to die with freedom, liberty, and integrity. Thank you.
Aloha, members of the U.S. Japan Council. I am very happy to be here with you today. I'm a member of the Hawaii House of Representatives. But first, I wanted to thank three special people for their support in bringing me here to this conference and their contributions to the goal of cooperation between the United States and Japan. Irene Kawanabe, Director of the National Asian Pacific American Caucus of State Legislators, Irene Hirano Inoue, Founding President of the U.S. Japan Council, and Junko Tsuda, Executive Director of the U.S. Japan Council, and of course the Sasakawa Foundation. All of you have worked so hard on this project, and I truly thank you and appreciate your efforts. Being an Asian American means that I'm a part of a minority group in my home country. My ancestors moved to America from Japan during hard times looking for a better life. America was the land of promise and possibilities. My grandfather, on my mother's side, Lauren Ichiji Miyamoto, was born in 1890 in Kumamoto, Japan. After moving to Hawaii, he attended high school and then the University of Hawaii and became a chemist and worked at the Ola Sugar Company on the Big Island. He met his wife, Fusayo Hayashida Miyamoto, who was born on Oahu in 1895, and she bore my mother, Nancy Nobuko Miyamoto, who was the youngest of 10 children. My mother, Nancy, married my father, Stan Tsuyoshi Yamashita, and he served in the U.S. Army and was stationed in Germany during the Korean War. He worked for many years in construction and became an acoustic tile setter. My grandfather, Yutaka Yamashita, was born in Hanapepe, Kauai in 1900, and he was an auto mechanic with C. Brewer and Company. One story I'd like to share with you is that my father's mother's mother was a picture bride from Japan. And she, my great-grandmother, got off the boat and started to start her new life and saw how short the man she was about to marry was. Well, the story goes she immediately wanted to get back on the boat and head back home as soon as possible. Lucky for me, that didn't happen. I decided to become a legislator because of my children. When you become a parent, you look at life differently. You think more about the future of the world and how you want to help create it. With two young boys, I became very involved with the Boy Scouts of America and youth sports. But it was the camping, fishing, hiking, that was the hook for the boys. But the program was really about building leaders, and that's what I loved about the program. As a Boy Scoutmaster, I worked with other parents that had the same belief in developing leadership in our children. Those parents were in business, nonprofits, government, and I started mixing with that crowd, and that's how the conversation of me running for elective office got started. I won my election in 2004 and have been in public office ever since. I also was a member of the school board at King Kekaulike High School. Their priority was to build a performing arts center. As their representative, I worked hard to make it happen, but with money for construction being hard to come by, I had to learn how the Department of Education prioritizes projects. We had to bring people together, teachers, students, families in the department, and we talked about, found common ground on working towards a solution. We started with planning money for the Performing Arts Center in 2005. We held meetings and talked about the vision and worked on construction in phases. And 12 years later, it was built. Education is not just about academics. Sometimes extracurricular activities is the hook for them to buy into education. And I took classes in drama and band, and I can tell you that if it wasn't for that being a part of my experience, I would not be where I am today. Just as communities work together to achieve common goals, we now can work together as Americans and Japanese to promote common goals to make life better for the next generation through education, through business, and through peace. planning for the future is something I think we all can agree upon. Thank you.
I ran for office to serve my community and serve my state. I'm Wyoming State Representative Mike Yin. I was born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, in a suburb. My parents are both Chinese. My father was born in China. His family left China during the Cultural Revolution, and he ended up in America in high school. My mother is from Malaysia. She ended up in America for college, and they met each other in Georgia, where I grew up. I was born and raised there, and I grew up as a child of immigrants. I went to college for computer science and eventually moved to New York City to enjoy being a young adult and write software for a living. During that time, after a few years, I stayed informed in politics and even got involved a little bit. I was the one that tried to get information on every single candidate on the ballot, even the ones that ran out unopposed, so I would know who I was voting for. I would share all the information I had accumulated with my friends to make sure they were able to be informed as well when they voted. Eventually, I even canvassed for a candidate for the governor of New York that was challenging the current incumbent governor. However, I never really imagined I would run for office. Eventually, I decided I needed to leave New York and try life somewhere else. I moved to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, to try out a new life somewhere with great outdoors, and the thought that I could eventually move back to the big city in a year. But I ended up loving both the outdoors and the community I came to call home. The town of Jackson's not very big. It's about 22,000 people in the surrounding area and about 10,000 people that live in the town itself. But it swells to about twice the population during the summer tourist season. I realized I wanted to contribute more to this community I called home, especially if I wanted to start a family and live there permanently, and eventually found a calling to get involved with local elections. I first started by helping canvass for candidates for the Democratic Party, and then even helped a friend run for town council. Over the next year, I got more and more involved and realized on the state level there were still not very many young people like me, and not even people that looked like me either. I decided to run for office. I decided I wanted to serve my community. I decided that I wanted to inspire other young people to also step up and serve to promote a diversity of ideas that weren't very often seen in my state. It's been about a year since I've been elected, and I've learned how incredibly fulfilling it is to serve my community and my state. And I can't wait to also help other candidates run for office and join me in the Wyoming State Legislature. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Each of your stories is so exciting and touching. And even though you have grown up as Americans, I can understand that you have kept the Asian value, such as engagement with the community, hard work, work ethics, or education, etc. Thank you very much. And so I would like to first start with a very fundamental question of what does it mean to you being Asian American in America? And how far or how much are you conscious of being Asian American in your daily work? And I'd like to ask this question first to the Kyle Yamashita-san, because your family came to United States the earliest. And also, I'd like to ask the same question to the first generation American, Milin first. Okay, so Kyle-san, please.
Being an Asian American, I think, gives you, like I said in my speech, we are part of a minority group. I think it was very different for me in Hawaii because when I grew up there, the minorities were the majority. So when I started working with the National Asian Pacific Caucus state legislators and my colleagues across on the other 48 or 50, 49 states, I started to learn the challenges that they had, and it was different from mine. And I think, growing up in Hawaii, there were people before me that gave me the opportunities that that made me feel like I wasn't part of a minority, and that of course was Irene's husband and many others from the 1954 revolution of the Democratic Party, and it's a whole other story. But I think in general, the challenges have been where the first generation wanted for their kids so much, they wanted them to be Americans. So sometimes I think we've lost some of the language and some of the culture. And when it came to my generation, they barely spoke Japanese and they barely talked about culture. But I think the bright side is that there are my children now are wanting to know about their, where they came from and their culture. So there's a revitalization of those efforts to understand that. And they are actually, there's things that I did know, but there are things that they are teaching me. And of course, my involvement with the Asian Caucus and these types of trips actually bring everything full circle.
Interesting, the different sentiment depending on the generations of the Japanese Americans. Okay, so Milene, please.
Thank you. So in order to answer that question, I have to share stories. So as I shared, I came to the United States in the spring of 1983. I did not speak English. However, I was fluent in French. And started having to start to learn English from the beginning. I quickly realized that in order to be successful, I need to abandon everything that was from my country, from Vietnam. I think the only thing, as you can see, that I kept was my name. I let go of my language. I let go of all the culture. I listened to American music. I immersed myself and became very much American. When I got accepted to the University of Washington, someone gifted me a journal putting together by the Vietnamese Student Association at the University of Washington. So I was basically forced to read it in Vietnamese. And I still remember that story even after so many years. It felt like you were walking in the desert and somebody offered you a glass of water. And once I took that first sip of water, I realized how thirsty I was, how much I wanted to be me again. And because of that experience, and because now I have this opportunity to serve my community at large, one of the first items that I did in my last session was to put forward a resolution at the state level recognizing and celebrating Lunar New Year. Which is very much celebrated among many of the Asian countries and Asian culture in Washington state. However, it was never being recognized at that top level of the government that's serving all the people.
Thank you very much. It's a very touching story. And even though, as was mentioned, now the Asian Americans represent the fastest growing the ethnic group in the United States. So you now represent the bigger voice of Asian Americans. But still, all of you define yourself as the part of minority group. And that means you must have undergone the discrimination or the unequal the access to the opportunities, or sometimes racial intolerance, etc. I imagine. But those experiences, do you think that those experiences give you the special strengths of viewing things from the broader perspective, or multinational, the multicultural perspective, and viewing things from the viewpoint of the very vulnerable people? And how do you reflect those experiences in your policy making, for instance, on education or health and immigration? And since Milene already talked about very touching story about your own the program, so now I would like to ask Nima-san to talk about those the experiences.
Thank you very much. There were a lot of questions in there, I think. So I am a minority in terms of the population in Kentucky. So Indian Americans are a minority, Indians generally. I'm also a minority in the political party that in the state. So I'm a super minority. The majority is held by the Republican Party. I have always considered my immigrant background as a source of strength. My identity as an Indian, my contact with India, the fact that I was born there, and remember a lot of it because I came here when I was young but not a baby. I still speak the language. We still, have all the traditions at home. I think all of that is something that I've fought to keep. I want to make sure I don't forget the language. I want to make sure that I identify as Indian. In one of the pictures on the slide, you can see when I was sworn in, I was wearing a traditional Indian outfit. I think generally in Kentucky, people don't necessarily know what to make of me. They're not sure. I'm Indian, I'm Hindu, I'm Muslim. They don't really know where I'm from, what language I speak. So they've kind of stayed away from any comments or any questions like that. In the legislature, they can't pronounce my name properly, but my entire family's been dealing with that since we moved to Kentucky, so that's not a problem. I think one of the things, and you're right, I think one of the reasons that I maybe look at helping the most vulnerable people around me is because I know that they don't necessarily have that strong cultural background that I draw strength from. So there's a lot of issues with the African American community, for instance, which is about half of the population of my district, where they've been specifically marginalized. Women, there's a lot of socioeconomic inequality in Kentucky where there's more of a difference between the haves and the have-nots, and that affects everything from education, access to health care, safety in terms of where you live, upward mobility, the value of your assets, intergenerational poverty. There's a lot of issues that I think once you're in a place, depending on where you're born, you never get out of. Because of the way a lot of the systems in America and in Kentucky work. So I think having had an experience where I saw my parents have a lot, we had a good life in India, leave it entirely, start brand new, start from scratch with basically nothing in a state that was very, very foreign, very strange. It was not full of brown faces. It was not full of immigrants of any kind. I think there was one Chinese restaurant maybe in Louisville at the time, then build that life back up for their children. And in the course of doing that, always find time to give back to the community. I think those are the things that I have taken from my childhood, in addition to that cultural component that I brought with me and kept with me as a child from India. All of that has informed every decision that I've made as an attorney. It's why I became an immigration attorney. And as a legislator, every law I look at, every law that is presented, I look at in terms of the impact it would have on the most vulnerable people in Louisville and the most vulnerable people in Kentucky. And if it's not something that's going to benefit them, if it's something that's going to hurt them, there's not probably any chance that I'm going to vote for that piece of legislation, because it needs to be our job and our responsibility as policymakers to help the people that we represent, not to hurt them, to get out of the way and not hinder them in terms of their growth and their progress and their survival in some cases. So I think that background has really made it very clear from a very early age the need for me to take all the strengths, all of the skills, all of the experiences that I have and make sure that I use them to help others around me.
Thank you very much. Rochelle, anything to add?
I think what I really appreciate about this program is the focus on the people-to-people relationships. And I think of my own family situation. So my mother is Caucasian, and her father was a first-generation German American. He identified with Nazi beliefs. So when my mother, his daughter, a white woman, decided to marry and have children with a Vietnamese man, it was a very significant change. But with that being said, I think seeing those personal relationships, my mom saw her own father change his beliefs. My father later lived with us as he grew older, and that was at the insistence of my father, who is Vietnamese, because family is important and you don't run away family. He was very involved in my life growing up, and I saw how those personal interactions can change. So I think being an Asian American in the legislature, being at that table, can change perceptions about people and change beliefs, because sometimes people don't have those interactions with other people. And once you can put that face, when you can put that personal story, when you can meet the person that's in front of you, it's very hard to believe in stereotypes or other misperceptions about any group of individuals. So I really relate to, what this program, the U.S. Japan Council, is trying to encourage with these person-to-person relationships, because I do think that they can make a huge difference.
Thank you. So turning to slightly different the subject, I think that since you come from the different Asian countries, and also the parents or your grandparents that came from Asian countries, you must have a very special emotional attachment to those countries. So are there any particular diplomatic agenda that you would like to promote between United States and the country of your ancestry or your home country? And maybe I think I should start with Chris, because I think you mentioned in your written statement that you would like to have a peace in the Korean Peninsula. So.
That's correct, yes. And to be quite honest, I had not been able to connect with my Korean heritage as much as prior to being in elected office. I didn't like going to Korean school. I would ditch and not really care about the culture. And then when I became an elected official and realized all of these Koreans from random pockets of Indiana would ask me things or email my office and contact me, I really thought, oh, I need to take this more seriously, because people are looking towards me as a Korean American member of the Indiana House of Representatives to do work on their behalf. So I learned a whole lot in the first year that I was in office. Regarding the agenda, I think it's just, it's an interesting time for us to be visiting Japan as a delegation from America, and for me uniquely as being a Korean American, with the court case that was handed down in Korea regarding forced labor during World War II, and then the ongoing conflicts with comfort women and the argument over reparations and the political motivations in Korea and maybe the political motivations in Japan. Having met with a few people from the U.S. Embassy here, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs here, talking to scholars here, I think what we're all looking for is some kind of compromise here. We're looking for negotiation, and we want to be able to unify more as an Asian region to we don't want to, we never want to erase any history, and I don't think anyone has ever put that forward, except maybe some fringe, kind of extreme viewpoints. But I think the majority of people in both Japan and Korea want to be able to move past this and create a strong alliance, a stronger alliance with the United States. Because we face many serious growing threats that we've been learning about on this trip. A unique viewpoint about what's going on with China, North Korea, Russia, and all of those threats that we'll need to band together and cooperate in order to be strong.
Thank you very much. That is very encouraging, the point. And I received a question from the floor related to that. it is about the same point. In East Asia, in Far East in particular, now there are a lot of the stressful situations between neighboring countries, between Japan, Korea, Japan, China, etc. So, but in the United States, how the Japanese, Koreans, Japanese, Chinese, the Americans, or the Japanese Americans, Korean Americans, how they're able to cooperate together in order to form the Asian American community together. And I think that will also promote the peace in this region as well. So, Mike-san, do you have any thought on that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think growing up in the South, there was more of an Asian community, and we have groups of all over Asia. And one of the strongest points of figuring out how we get along is just finding that commonality. So we find that I think while we are different in a lot of ways, we're the same in more ways. And when you find that part where you're the same and you can find a way to realize that you have more in common than you're different, then you find strength together. And finding that strength together is really what binds a lot of the Asian American community, especially when they find that there are common issues in both the state level, the federal level, that affect all of the Asian American community. And so that's how we move forward as a community together, I think.
Mm. Actually, there are many questions from the floor about the politics. But before moving to that subject, let me just ask you some gender-related issue here. And we have such a wonderful, perfect parity, gender parity in this delegation, 3 female and 3 males. But when you actually look at the women in the parliament ranking in the world, the United States, out of 190 countries, do you know the U.S. ranking? That is a 77th. In other words, that 23.5% the representation of women in the parliament. And Japan, 164th. That is 10.11%. So still, we are far from the perfect gender parity. So now I would like to address this question to the female, the members. What was the biggest challenge when you decided to run for the public office? And of course, institutionally, there must have been some the barriers or hurdles, but also psychologically, as the women of Asian descent, you must have some psychological barriers to run for the office. So what was the greatest challenge, and if there are any good advice for Japanese women seeking to run for the elected office, what would be your advice? As a first from Nima-san, maybe?
Thank you very much for that question. It is very important. I think we need more women, certainly in the U.S. We need more women globally to run for office because the world needs to be represented by people who are within the communities they come from. So I think in terms of your last question, I think if you're a Japanese woman and you're even remotely interested in politics, go ahead and run or work on a campaign, get involved, just go ahead and get involved. Because I think as women generally, and certainly as Asian American women, we tend to overthink and have to really convince ourselves that we're good enough to run, that, losing is okay if we have to lose, or, what if we lose? I think we have to go through a whole analysis that maybe men, maybe they do, I'm not saying they don't, but I think we do it a lot more. So you see a lot of women who would be fantastic. I know in Kentucky, there are a lot of women that I would love to see run for some kind of elected office who just don't think they can do it. And that's something that I had to overcome as well because I live in a district where there's no Indian people at all, like not one. So they couldn't vote for me. There were very few immigrants. A lot of them, it's about half and half Caucasian and African American. There are a lot of union workers. There's a lot of teachers. So, one of the things I had to really overcome was having to knock on doors where there's, retired firemen and big, burly kind of construction workers, and what are they going to think? They can't pronounce my name. They don't know what I'm, doing at their door. Because on a state level, the way you campaign is literally knocking on doors and saying, hello, I'm Nima, I'm running for office, please vote for me. And so that is something I had to overcome because I had never done anything like that before. And one of the things that helped me with that is just the conviction that if I didn't run for office, there would continue to be a person in office who didn't care about representing his community, who had been there for 20 years, who didn't look like his community anymore, and who didn't care enough to be engaged with his voters or with other legislators. And in that particular time period where we had, after 2016, we had the presidential election, and again, our governor was sort of doing the same thing in Kentucky, parroting the same kind of rhetoric against women, against minorities, against immigrants. I really think the impetus for me getting over that and making sure that I tried was that I could no longer sit on the sidelines. And so I think for a lot of the women in Kentucky, and please stop me if I'm going too long, we had a record number of women enter the legislature. We have 38 Democratic members, and 19 of them now are women. A lot of them were educators. So I think for a lot of them, similar to me, there was a tipping point where they just couldn't take it anymore. They had to be involved. They had to make a change. And they had to really put forth the effort regardless of the outcome. And I think that's the message that I'd like to impart is go ahead and try. You can only lose, and then you can run again.
Thank you. Go ahead and try. Millie, Rochelle, very briefly.
I think it's really important for women to run. I think of having that voice at the table when you are talking about women's reproductive rights and there's a room full of men and not a single woman in there. I think it is a unique perspective that we bring to the table. When you're talking about, leave, like parental leave or pregnancy issues, and there's not a single person that has given birth to a child, I think it's significant to have a woman at the table. I can't tell you how many times I was asked, I'm a mother of 2 young children, ages 7 and 9, and I would sit in a room and people would ask repeatedly how hard it was for me to leave my children, to come and serve in office and be sitting at that table to talk about my experience. And yes, it is hard. I'm not going to say it's not hard. It's very hard. It's probably one of the hardest things that I've done. And it's a unique position that women are forced to make that decision. But on the flip side, my male counterparts with children of the same age are never asked that question, ever. We will be sitting at a panel like this, and they will not be asked that question, whereas I will be as a woman. So those are some unique challenges that you have to overcome, but I think the significance and what my family has always discussed is it's important for that viewpoint of women to be at the table when issues related to women are being discussed.
Yes, certainly. So for me, what I needed to overcome was the very cultural expectation. The first one is a woman's place. And in my cultures, and in many Asian culture, a woman's place is in the house. And so I literally took that sentiment during my campaign as I ran for the House representative. I use the same slogan that, yes, a woman's place is in the house, and I'm running to be in the house. The second cultural expectation is really a woman need to be soft-spoken and loving and kind, and I do the same thing. I really am showing everything I do it through my heart. Everything I do is about loving the people and loving my community. And so all of my community engagement and campaign trail, I spoke from the heart and fit right into the very cultural expectations of what it is being an Asian woman. but that shouldn't be barriers to stop us from doing the things that we need to do, representations, at the same time, being a soft-spoken and being in the House shouldn't be a barrier for any woman to serve their community.
Thank you very much. There is a question from the floor. That's an interesting point because all of you represent the Democratic Party. And the question is why the Asian Americans attracted to the Democratic Party? And the very related question is among all the candidates for the Democratic Party for 2020 presidential election, what do you think about their diversity? And if I may add, if you do not mind, if you just give us which candidate you support. Of course, you are perfectly, you have every right to say no comment or the passing, but just anybody about the why the Christian.
I am not currently supporting any candidate right now. It's a very large field of candidates, so I just want to wait. Indiana's primary is kind of later in the cycle, so things are going to change completely by the time the ballot gets to me. Regarding why Asian Americans, I think, are more so attracted to the Democratic Party, it wasn't always like that way, for sure. My parents still identify as Republicans. However, my father's a pro-Trump Republican. My mother's an anti-Trump Republican. So there's still ability to kind of cross identities. And with Ronald Reagan, he attracted a lot of Asians to his base through mainly fiscal policy like taxation and welfare reform and the social safety net reform. But with the rise of Donald Trump and Trumpism, it represented a fundamental shift even for me myself, being raised in a Republican household. I don't say that I left the party. I say that the party kind of left me. It was difficult to see a future with this brand of rhetoric that was pretty, very unprecedented and very negative, honestly. We had always been, even during the George Bush administrations, we had even championed immigration then. In different ways, we might have agreed on the specifics, but we still said immigrants are net positive for the country, and we're not seeing that anymore. So we can always change party affiliations in the future, though, so who knows?
Anybody who wants to volunteer for that question?
I concur with Chris.
Okay, good.
Sure. So my parents are both, I think they call themselves independents, and they do vote. They tend to vote more conservatively, so for more Republicans than they do Democrats. I myself was originally a registered libertarian when I first started voting. It's been kind of a transition from a third party to becoming a Democrat over time, and I think a lot of the reason is just the social policies of the Republican Party has turned away a lot of people from my generation, and so that is really there's no fiscal policy that can convince me that the social policies of the opposing party was good. So it pushed me further and further away into the Democratic Party.
Thank you. So. Well, there is a question about the identity, and for instance, do you have any conflict between being identity as American and identity as Asian? And so, when you have that conflict, how do you solve the conflict in yourself? Maybe so, the Yamashita-san.
Let's see. Growing up in Hawaii, I think it's very different because we were very diverse, as I said before, and that is very prominent in the food we eat. Because there were so many, right? Hawaii was a plantation economy for many years, so they imported workers. I think it was first the Portuguese, then the Chinese, then the Japanese, then the Filipinos. And they all, at that time, lived in camps, and they had all the different kind of camps for all the different ethnic groups. But they still needed to work together, so they started collaborating on dishes. And I kind of commented earlier that somebody asked me, do I eat Japanese food at home? And I said, it's a different Japanese food, because I think over the years, because of the mixing with the different groups, the food changed a little bit, and traditional Japanese food was served, but in the home it was different. And today, I think there is more, like I said before, a push to be more culturally correct, or so the food is becoming more consistent with what I'm eating here. So, I think food is a good example of how we've, in Hawaii, adjusted to the things that you talked about.
That's a good example. And another question is, how soon will an Asian American president of the United States be realized? Will you aspire to be the one? Who answered the question? Millie? Yeah.
Well, I personally hope soon, and certainly that will not be me. Running for office in the United States, one can run for many different offices as long as you are a U.S. citizen. However, to be the president of the United States, you need to be a natural born. So that's why I say it's not me. However, I certainly am hoping that having an Asian American U.S. president would be significant, especially as many of the individual who has mentioned before that Asian Americans is a growing group as far as population is concerned.
Well, I have many more questions, and I assume that the floor has many more questions, but time starts running out. So my last question is to all of you, and you had almost a week-long trip, some of you, the first time in Japan. So what impressed you the most in this country? And based on your the first-hand experiences here in Japan, what is the expectation about Japan-U.S. relations? What should be in the future? So Chris.
I was most impressed by the hospitality of the Japanese people. Everyone is incredibly polite and very well spoken and very attentive to your needs wherever you go. And I think we kind of lack that politeness in the United States sometimes. So I'm really optimistic, and I'm sure my colleagues are too, about the future of Japan-U.S. relationships. I mean, presidents come and go, and countries remain, and the people are the ones who ultimately will make the decision as to what we're going to do in the future. And we've heard a lot of positive things regarding especially trade, business, and military relationships that will contribute to a strong Japan-U.S. relationship. As we were told at MOFA, the Asia represents a lot of threats regarding China and North Korea especially, but also a lot of benefits as well, becoming huge trade partners for the rest of the world and exporting a lot of fantastic things that we enjoy in the United States. So I've been very grateful.
I was very impressed by the direct honesty and the great willingness and desire to continue to sustain positive relations with the United States. On a person-to-person level. So we got a lot of business cards, but those business cards meant something, right? They meant something to the people giving them, and they meant something to the people receiving them. Certainly in our delegation, I fully intend to follow up with the people that we met. Certainly, we visited the Osaka Prefectural Assembly, and we met one of 5 women out of 88. So I'm, going to follow up with these individuals that we met, the leaders, the community leaders, the elected officials, because I think that there is a great room for growth, certainly in Kentucky and throughout the United States, to foster these kinds of positive relationships, despite, as Chris said, any kind of political changes in administration. And I think that's something that this program facilitates, and I think it's what will make the difference moving forward.
I think what I was most excited to see and I guess enlightened to see was the diversity that Japan has. We were able to travel to multiple different areas throughout Japan And to see the different character, the different food, the different dialects, to hear, it was a very sensory experience, whether it was the landscape, going from countryside and the sand dunes, and then into the city. It was exciting to see that diversity. I look forward to the relationships that we started here, and I see them as a starting point. And so I look forward to continuing to build those relationships between the U.S. and Japan.
So for me, what has left most memorable experience was really the opportunity to connect with the youth at one of the schools we visited. They certainly gave me so much hope, and not only that, one of the students taught me about a really, really cool pop artist that I didn't know about. And so that was certainly an awesome experience for me. And as shared, this is the sixth delegation going through this experience. I believe that I have many colleagues, not only here in front of you, but back at home to draw experience from and to learn from and to build that coalitions in order to ensure that U.S.-Japan relationship maintain and sustain.
My comment is a little bit different. I think that most of my life I've been in business. I've either in my early life I managed different businesses, but then as I got older, I had 4 stores, and I sold them maybe about 3-4 years ago. But what always amazes me is that the Japanese people are so willing to pay for quality. And in America, they expect quality, but they don't like pay, right? So that's what makes it hard to do business in America. So I really appreciate that of the Japanese people. Thank you.
So this is my second trip to Japan, and what has impressed me both in that last trip and this trip has been the beauty of Japan. Not just the countryside when we toured Tottori, but even the cities and the historical preservation of all the temples, and other just long history of the Japanese people and the Japanese country. And so that continues to impress me. It impresses me then, it impressed me now. And I think when it comes to U.S.-Japan relations, I do believe that there is a bright future for us, not just from our current standing, but going forward as well.
Use your earphone. 皆様、本日は本当にご参加ありがとうございました。大変この今パネルを終えるときに気持ちがいい、明るい気持ちで終えることができるというふうに感じたのは多分私だけではないと思います。それはここにいらっしゃる方たちが多様なバックグラウンドで時には苦しい経験もしながら希望とか理想主義というものをアメリカの社会の中で掲げ続けていきたいと思ってらっしゃるそのパッションが大変素晴らしいと。でそこに非常に大きな我々はその将来アメリカへの希望というものを持てるんではないかというふうに思いました。それからクリスがおっしゃった点、非常に重要だと思うんですが、アメリカの中でアジアの連帯というものを作っていく、それがひいては将来に向けてそのアメリカからまたアジアの連帯平和というものを導き出していく力になるということは本当に素晴らしいメッセージだったんじゃないかと思います。今日はこういう人と人とのつながりということでもこの州議会の議員の皆様が日本に来てくださって日本をいろいろ見てくださったということは日米関係に大きな力になるというふうに思います。本日はどうもありがとうございました。